All right. Okay. I think we're good. All right. So I am here today with Dr. Maysa Akbar, who your book is launching today, which is beyond exciting. How are you feeling right now?
Um, I guess maybe a little nervous, anxious. This is my first book, and it just seems like it was a really long process. I've definitely, I told my husband this morning, I said, oh, we have a new birth date now to add to the calendar. I feel like I birthed the book today. So October 3rd is a very special day now in our household.
Yes, I feel like it's a special day for us too. I know that, at the end of the day, this is your book and your work, but I feel like it's just been so incredible to work with you and to work alongside you. And we've been working on this since January. And in the grand scheme of things, you managed to get this done in 10 months. Like that's pretty impressive from like start to finish, like words on paper to now, which is not a surprise knowing you as well as I do at this point that you were able to do it in 10 months.
Thank you. No, you know, I've mentioned in a couple of the social media outlets that this was a labor of love, but it was really it has been on my mind for years. And the development of the book and how it was going to come together was really what came together during the last 10 months. But the information that I gathered, the research, the people that I talk about in the book, those have all been phenomenal experiences, life-changing experiences that I've had a collection of stories over the last 10 to 15 years. And what you'll see there, my mentor, Dr. Vetta Sanders Thompson, talks about how many times I threw this idea out to her, and she was like, Maysa, you are, and you're an academic. You have a high standard. You're a PhD and an ABPP, board certified. Urban trauma. What is that? That's not a technical psychological word. That doesn't, that doesn't, there's nothing in the research about that. And I said, right, that's exactly right. But we need to come up with innovative ways so that everyone can understand what it means to go through traumatic experiences based on who we are as a people, based on the legacy of racism that has been interwoven into our communities. And the best way that I can capture it is by calling it urban trauma. And she was like, all right, there you go again. If you say so. I always get that look from her like, okay.
Her forward is incredible. I feel like just even in her forward, like just talking about like you as a person and just your accomplishments and everything, like it really just kind of solidifies, at least, obviously I'm a little bit too close to it. I'm not an average reader, but looking at it, it's like, wow, I can see why this person felt compelled to write this book. So why don't you start at the top? So I've been talking about your book on Facebook for a while because I'm just so proud to be the one that's behind the scenes helping you get this out there. So why don't you just start high level, tell people, what the name of the book is and what, you don't have to read the back jacket description, but just kind of explain from a high level, what the takeaway is for somebody who might want to pick this up and read it. And I will give a little display, which is super exciting.
I know, right? It's so exciting to actually touch the physical book. I was like, I've been enamored by it. Like, oh, wow. It has like pages and,
it looks good. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. So why did I decide to write this book? As a psychologist that works, I think, in a very progressive community here in Connecticut that really has a lot of thought about mental health. And, I've been fortunate enough to be a business owner and a psychologist in New Haven, where we have an extremely progressive mayor. And the mayor of our city is consistently thinking about the wellness, both emotional and mental, of her community, of her people here. And so I get to go to all these roundtable discussions. And I'm invited, to finally be around the table, which is important, trust me, because we weren't always invited to be around the table, which then gives a voice, not just for me, as a person of color, but for all the people that I represent, right? And so the real trigger, like I said, it was percolating in my mind for quite some time. The real trigger came in that one day I'm sitting in a meeting, and there was a group of professionals in that meeting, and I was one of the only people of color there. And the discussion was talking about trauma in the inner city. And I don't know, I just had a moment, maybe it was an epiphany or something, or an internal meltdown. I don't know what it was, but I had a moment where I said, wait, how is it possible that we're talking about trauma in the inner city and I am the only person of color sitting around this table? How is it possible that there are a bunch of white people sitting here dictating to communities of color what their trauma experience looks like and how they should resolve it? And it was just mind-blowing to me, because I'm like, you have never been through what we've been through. You can never fathom that type of trauma. Certainly you can talk about other trauma, but this type of trauma, I think that there needs to be a different level of communication and a different level of understanding that, and a different type of platform that comes out of discussing this type of trauma. And that day I left and I said, that's it. I'm writing this book. No more thinking, no more, leaving things in the idea box and not executing, no more fear around what will happen if I write something, because I think that there was a part of me that feared, I don't know, maybe criticism or exposure or something, I mean, that's just human side of me. But I had to fight that. And I had to fight that because I had to understand that this was for the greater good, that this was far beyond me and my own little insecurities about however I was going to feel, that there was a message that needed to be delivered, and that message could not wait any longer. And then it just so happened that probably happened right at the beginning of the year. And then, what has happened in the news is that week after week after week after week, there's one insult and then another insult and then another insult, and it really just hasn't stopped. So if I ever needed confirmation, from the universe, from God, from a greater almighty being, that this was timely and needed to get done, boy, the confirmations were coming consistently, saying you gotta buckle down and you have to make this happen.
So in terms of, that meeting where you're the only person of color and it's just, a bunch of white people trying to dictate what your actual full on area of expertise is, like, you've really dedicated so much of your career to working with especially children in urban communities. So can you just tell us a little bit more about your, I know you mentioned that you're in New Haven, but about your practice and how you serve your clients, and then how this book is kind of the broader, ability to impact more people who are also serving urban communities?
Yeah. So I have a fully functioning behavioral health practice here in New Haven. And what the cornerstone to our practice and what we've really prided ourselves in is that not only do we serve, urban communities of color, we are experts in cultural competence. We understand that when people come in, well, let me back up for a second. Help-seeking behaviors, meaning people who seek mental health treatment in communities of color, has been a very complex vortex, right? The stigma around mental health in the Black community, in particular, has really created a barrier for people that are great candidates for receiving mental health treatment not getting the treatment. Mm-hmm. And it's because there is a shame and a guilt that comes along with seeking treatment, as if your wellness emotionally or your mental stability is something that you shouldn't dedicate time and energy and money towards. It's almost like, you know, the myth that the Black community is so strong and has overcome so many obstacles and so many barriers that, you know, there's no need to take care of that. You know, you just keep doing what you're doing. But the reality is that people are fatigued. They're tired. This has been generations of the same fight. And every time we have to face a different iteration of racism, the ante is changed. It becomes more sophisticated. We have to get more, more sophisticated ourselves in learning how to deal with it. And so people are just exhausted. They're exhausted mentally. They're exhausted emotionally. They're exhausted spiritually. And so a lot of times when they go to seek treatment, what is not discussed is the racial component of the psychology behind why they're coming into treatment to begin with. Instead, it's the symptom, you know, the diagnosis. Oh, you have anxiety, you have depression, you know, you are bipolar, or you have this, and there's all these labels that fly around. You have trauma. But does anybody ever stop to think about the role that race plays into those things? So if I'm consistently in a situation where I'm being oppressed and where active racism is occurring in my workplace, in my community, in my environment, well, don't you think I would become depressed over that? Don't you think that I would develop panic attacks and anxiety? Of course I will. I mean, that's just what it is. But the deep-rooted issue is never discussed. The racism is never discussed. The oppression is never discussed. The battles that, you know, the Black community has had to engage in over and over again is not discussed. And so we're only treating these symptoms. And I'm going to frankly say that we're treating symptoms with many evidence-based treatments that have been standardized in white middle-class communities, not communities of color, not developed for communities of color, and certainly not developed for the Black community with the intent of dealing with racism, right? And so what we do is that we just take a different vantage point. We put that on the table immediately. We are extremely diverse here. You know, we have, I think, probably one of the practices that has the most people of color of every type of race that you can think of, or ethnicity that you can think of. And so there is a match for everyone, where you can have those open discussions with your therapist, and you don't have to be afraid to talk about that. What got you here was definitely somebody may be telling you that you were depressed, but that could be the secondary issue that actually is the outcome of you being in a full-fledged war against racism, right? I mean, I can talk about, you know, well, I can go on and on about that.
You know, one of the things that I learned so much in this process of working with you, because I really, truly thought that I was informed around race issues. Like, I really thought I was educated. And I feel like your book has been game changing in a way, because like you really take that historical component and you bring it to the present day and really kind of shed the light of like why these issues exist. And one of the things that I found fascinating was the percentage of practitioners and clinicians who are people of color. And I don't remember the exact percentage, you might off the top of your head, but it was so low. I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, well, I mean, for psychologists, I can tell you right away, in this entire country, only 5% of psychologists are Black. Which
is
5.
That's mind-boggling to me. And I don't know if it's just because we're in Connecticut, and I feel like to some degree, I feel like we live in a bubble in a lot of ways, but like I know like a handful of Black psychologists that happen to be in Connecticut. So like to me, it didn't occur to me that the percentage would be so low, because to me it's more normalized that like, oh yeah, of course there's, you know, people of every race that are psychologists. But that was one of the things that really stood out to me of like, this is the problem, because if you only have 5% who are serving a population that's way more than 5%, then that's also one of those things that if you don't feel comfortable, or like the person that you're working with or confiding in understands you, or understands your history or any type of the legacy of racism, like the subtitle of your book, then I can see why people would not want to proactively seek out help.
Well, you also have to understand, even for the 5% that are trained in psychology, it's not like you're taking courses that say, okay, well, let's really focus on communities of color, and let's focus on understanding mental health from that lens. They take 1 or 2 cultural diversity classes, and, you hope that they'll integrate that. I mean, I not only had to become an expert in my profession and go through the years of schooling, 11 years combined to become a psychologist. Then above and beyond that, I had to become a student of Black history. I had to understand what the plight has been in this country for Black people. And I had to, not just from an experiential perspective, but from a study of, because that was the only thing that was going to enable me to intersect the historical, studies of Blacks in America and the psychology behind these two things, and interweave them, and then create a space, a very safe space for people to be able to talk about both. Without any shame and without any guilt, and without going into a therapist who will demonstrate microaggressions towards them because they're not understanding why they're bringing up race in a therapy session. Well, they can't bring it up in a therapy session. Where else should they bring it up? Well, I mean, we can't bring it up on TV, that's for sure. We certainly can't kneel about it. We certainly can't talk about it, publicly in any kind of place. I mean, so now you're talking about within enclosed, private sessions, you can't even talk about those things because people are not well trained to receive that type of information and to peel back the layers that need to be peeled back in order for those discussions to be healing, right? Because the purpose is that if you're coming in for treatment, is because you're in crisis. If you're coming in for treatment, and that's another point that I want to make, by the time that Black people get to treatment, you better believe that their whole world is falling apart. This is not the first choice. They have exhausted every single possibility, every single, resource that's out there. And finally, it has come to the point where they've said, this is the only thing I have left. This is it. This is the only thing. So can you imagine how much they're putting into this experience and how much they're having to fight the mistrust, the anger, the rejection, which are characteristics that I talk about in the book, that are part of the urban trauma collective, right? And so the mistrust, the rejection, the anger, having to put that on the table and now needing to discuss that with a person that's not competent enough to do it. You imagine that?
No. And I don't think most people can imagine that. Like, you can't really put yourself in someone's shoes in that regard. So we don't know who's watching this right now. So we're doing it live, and then this will be shared to whomever after the fact. And we don't know how many views we'll have. So will you just, pretending people know nothing, just share for a moment how you define a microaggression, because I know what that means, you know what that means, but someone listening might not really understand how damaging a microaggression could be. Or is.
Well, microaggressions come in a lot of different forms. And, they're not blatant aggressive acts. To me, they're like the sophistication of racism that I've been talking about, because as people get more sophisticated in their expression of racism, they've figured out, hey, it probably doesn't bode very well for me to actually overtly come out and say, X, Y, and Z about this group. I really shouldn't talk about building a wall around the Mexico border. That may not be taken very well by, by communities of color. So instead, what I'm going to do, and I'll give you a perfect example of one, right? I was having a conversation with a group of moms that we belong to a sporting event. We were at a sporting event, and they were having a discussion about a local grocery store that isn't too far from where our girls practice. And, you know, the grocery store is in kind of like I would say like a mixed community area. There's a few universities around, kind of an up and coming progressive, not yet gentrified area. And so one of the moms says, yeah, you know, sometimes I've had to stop by that grocery store and my kids are in the car and they're like, Mom, be careful when you go into the grocery store that you don't get shot, you know, and that, you know, I don't know that we should come here. Well, that's a really perfect example. So I'm sitting in this area, you know, and we were first talking about some other things. And the other moms laugh, who happen to be white, laugh. But I didn't really think that was funny. And I didn't think it was funny because historically, there have never been any shootings in that area. And what are you saying? That communities that are in transition or communities that are mixed are always communities where people get shot up and that you should be afraid for your life? You know, the message that comes across is a message that's done through microaggression, right? Like it is an aggressive act towards a community of people, but you're not saying, hey, I have racist tendencies and I'm biased and I rather go to a grocery store in a very white community where I'm going to feel appreciated and loved and nurtured and everyone else is going to look like me. Even if I have to pay more money to go there, instead, I'm going to have these negative stereotypes and connotation and actually support them, right? Keep talking about them freely as if they really do exist when they're not based on facts, right? Because these are not factual contents that are happening. These are just things that are stereotypical. And then I'm going to just talk about them. And those are expressions of microaggressions. I think that that's the best way that I can describe them. Yeah. Happen every day. Every day. The look that you get when you walk into a grocery store or a clothing store, being followed around, being asked several times if you need any help when you've already said no, you know, being questioned to give identification when 10 people before you have not been asked for identification. Sometimes, you know, the best way, I love to hear this one too, like, wow, you're so articulate. You're so intelligent.
It's a big one.
Yeah, right? Like, yeah, why wouldn't I be? You know, you're so different, right? So all those are examples of microaggressions.
Yeah. So, yeah, I feel like this topic is just fascinating in so many ways. And I know that, you know, when you were working with the editor, so going through that process, I know at one point in time, which, I know, right? This is a good warning. I
have hair, actually.
I'm surprised that we have hair, your team and mine, from just this past weekend's events. Like, you know, but at the end of the day, we are here. The book is live. Might be a few less hairs in our head, but, you know, we're good. But you survived the editing process. But I know in the editing process, there was conversation about allies and how to engage allies. And then we ended up ruling out that it just didn't fit properly within the context of this book. Not to say, like, this book is meant for everyone, anyone who is serving in urban communities. So to me, like, my takeaway of this is that people who are school psychologists, people are school social workers, special education teachers, like, I mean, anyone who is serving a population that they do not represent themselves, really is what it comes down to. So I really feel like this is for any white person, I'll just call it like it is, who is working with Black students, for example, or students of any color for that matter. But when we go broader and we say, any therapist, any clinical psychologist, really anyone who's working with this community, right? My vision and dream for your book is the fact that this does become like a desktop reference for people to really understand what others are going through, because I feel like you position it in a very empathetic to some degree. Like you really share your story, you like bear it all, and I don't think you leave anything out on the tape. Like you don't leave anything left unsaid, and I think it'll surprise the reader as they go through it, because it starts off with Dr. Vetta saying like, Maysa's so great, and all these like very complimentary things, but also actually goes into your story a bit. But then you like shock people much later in the book, where you start talking about a personal example of the way in which your urban trauma kind of comes to the surface, and you're talking about an ex, I believe. So saying all of that, the characteristics of urban trauma. So you have outlined that there are a number of characteristics that somebody could basically use as a system to help identify if somebody is suffering, or suffering is probably not the right word, but has urban trauma. Can you elaborate to whatever degree you feel comfortable? And then of course, people can certainly buy the book if they want more information.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what makes the book unique is that it's a platform that I've used to share quite a bit of my story. Mm-hmm. And I chose specific pieces of my story that I thought would highlight what my urban trauma experience was like. And that wasn't very easy. I think that as an academic, it's really, it has become commonplace to talk about things in third person. Mm-hmm. You can talk about a problem, a symptom, a disorder, you can talk about stigma, you can talk about mental health, and you can be at an arm's length from all of that. And you can talk about it from a very powerful position of being an expert, Mm-hmm. And I had a choice that I could have done that. But then I thought, while I was writing it, and I know that you absolutely challenged me, and I was very, very uncomfortable during your challenges. Very
understatement.
I really had like a little Maysa tantrums along the way, which are not cute, by the way, if you've experienced Maysa tantrums. I needed to bring it home, and I needed to really connect with the authenticity of who I was as mm-hmm. a person, the authenticity of who I am as a mother, as a woman, and as a child who throughout her childhood experienced urban trauma in a variety of different ways. Mm-hmm. It was really interesting because at the point that I started to detail the characteristics, and I'm going to, for the first time, share them with the world publicly, because I've been very, very mysterious about what they were in the other interviews that I've done. And now you'll get to read them in a lot of detail. There are 6 characteristics. Anger is one of them, and they're not in any order. You can, I think as a person who's either reading this because maybe you are a professional and can also identify with some of these characteristics, or maybe because you are someone that has worked with or lives with or interacts with, communities of color, and in particularly the Black community. These are the characteristics. So anger is one. Mistrust is the other one. Rejection. Perceptual error. And that's a really important one, because not to go too much into it, but because I feel like it deserves a little bit of an explanation. Mm-hmm. Our perceptions really do become our reality, but perceptions can be completely wrong. But once a perception has taken root, it is very, very difficult to change that perception, whether it is between 2 people having a conversation, or a group of people having a conversation, or a community, or a country, right? Mm-hmm. Those perceptions really live on. So I go on to sort of really explain what perceptions are and how mm-hmm. error comes into our perceptions in the overall umbrella of urban trauma. And the last one is manipulation. So, those are really, for me, the different, and fear, but that's the sixth one, fear. So those 6 characteristics really encompass the definition of urban trauma. And any one of these combined, you don't have to have all 6, you don't even have to have 3, but any combination of these at any point in your life, if you have experienced them the way that I describe them in the book, it gives you a really good indication about what your urban trauma experience is like. And what is really crucial to the process is that it is directly linked to the multi-generational encounters with racism. It is directly linked to the legacy that slavery has left behind, and how slavery has impacted us, not just in our minds, not just in our emotions, but biologically, in our biological makeup. And I go into an entire section where I talk about that. And that's so crucial because the science behind it is undisputable, right? And so these combination of things are what perpetuate urban trauma. And then I go on to talk about how do you, once you've acknowledged it, once you know it's there, how do you fight it? How do you combat it? How do you become a better person? And how do you become an advocate for those that are still knee deep into it and cannot get unstuck from their urban trauma?
I think that, what's so fantastic about your book, and there's a lot of things that I think are phenomenal about it, is that you also include a historical timeline in the pages of the book itself. So you're talking about the characteristics, but like your historical timeline goes through like the historical components of race-related issues. So you have the legal actions, you have the overt versus the covert types of things, but you also include at which points in time certain new theories kind of come to the surface. So whether we're talking about Erikson or Freud or whomever. So I feel like if nothing else, like if people wanted a cheat sheet, just looking, like buying the book just to see the fact that you took all of this time to compile this data and it takes up, like 3 or 4 pages. To me, that was such an enlightening experience looking through of thinking, wow, like it really puts it all into context in a very, like, you cannot miss how, and I think that's one of those learning things for me when I was saying that, like, I really thought I was educated around this, but looking at this chart, I was like, I am like clueless comparatively to the bigger picture. And it was really eye-opening. So if you have somebody who is, you want them to use this as a reference manual, how would you say that someone would go about doing that? Like, what is your hope that, if someone's watching this and then, maybe they're a social worker or maybe they're a psychologist themselves and, they recognize that this is something that, even if their practice is not made up of all people of color, but maybe they have 1, 2, 3 patients even, it's worth it for those 3 patients alone for you to be a knowledgeable practitioner. So do you have advice for how you would hope that they would like follow your methodology?
Well, I think what's important is there's 2 specific timelines that should be looked at. There's a timeline that looks at the historical traumatic events against Black people in this country, right? And I start from the very first day in 1619, when the first 20 slaves were forced into Jamestown, Virginia. And I take you through that historical timeline. And what it does, in the lens that you really should put every time you're looking at a new date and a new event, is what the new version of racism looks like. Right? It started at a very specific level in 1619. And then because of the fight towards freedom, because of the undeniable strength that exists in the Black community to overcome generations of abuse and trauma, we have been able to eliminate some of the most dehumanized ways in which Black people were treated in this country, right? So that's the first timeline, and an acknowledgement that the biggest traumatic event that has happened in this country has been slavery. And there is no discussion around that. That is the only and biggest traumatic event that has happened, right? And so, and if you want to understand what that looks like, you know, year after year, generation after generation, look at that timeline. And so it's called the Timeline of Historical Traumatic Events Against Black People. And I don't want to quote the book, the page number, just in case I'm off between the, you know, the version that I have. Yeah, trust me, we've been through enough of that. And then the other part that is found in section 3 of the book is the historical timeline of mental health. So another thing that I hear a lot is when we're talking about communities of color engaging in treatment is that, you know, they don't stay in treatment. We have high attrition rates. We have high no-show rates. We have high cancellation rates. They just don't show up. They come for a few sessions and then they're gone. And what again, that's a microaggression. But what that does is that it relieves the clinician from having responsibility over engagement, and it places responsibility on the person that's coming in to seek treatment. Isn't that amazing? You have the option by saying that to relieve yourself of the responsibility of engagement. And you're basically saying that they're just not showing up because they don't have the capacity or resources to be able to be astute enough to engage in the therapeutic process. But what you're not looking at is the historical timeline of what mental health has looked like in this country. So what it's looked like is that, you know, in the beginning, we weren't afforded the traditional mental health treatments that white folks had been given here. You know, when Freud was, you know, and psychoanalysis was huge, and you know, white people were going into psychoanalysis 5 days a week, you know, 1-2 hours a day. You never saw that the Black community was able to come in and do psychoanalysis to you know, to review the trauma of generational, you know, abuse, you know, in that community. No, instead, what was happening is that they were building asylums, institutions for the colored, where they would lock you up and they would keep you there and you would rot and you would die there. They were experimenting on us. They were abusing us in a system that was supposed to be designed to support and help us overcome our trauma. So today, don't sit there in your place of power and glory and say that we don't want to engage in treatment. Understand the history of why the mistrust in a system that has abused us is there, and try to make yourself available and make yourself the vessel of engagement, so that the responsibility around keeping people in treatment until they have resolved their crisis happens because you're taking ownership over what that process looks like, rather than blaming the folks that are coming in and further marginalizing them and further abusing and traumatizing them.
I feel like that all of what you just said is so powerful, because I do think that your book is the answer to so much, because somebody can read this and get a much bigger, broader view of the history to the present day. So, you know, as we're, you know, I think we're, what are we at? About 35-ish minutes or so, 40 minutes. You know, I know that I have felt since we started working together, which was in January, that your topic is incredibly timely. And I feel like with each passing day, your topic feels even more timely. And I feel like we are at some tipping point in our country where people have to wake up and pay attention. And I know that your book definitely has a psychology bend to it, a mental health bend to it. But at the same time, if people want just a history of racism in our country to kind of see where we get to in present day with racial profiling, like you really span the whole thing. And I feel like it's such a good history book. And I remember talking to you, it was like a couple weeks ago when I was saying that I was looking at the print copy. And it was the first time that I was reading it all at once, because I've been reading like different chunks at different times and nothing in any sequential order. And I remember saying to you, like, I was almost nervous about the section about on epigenetics, where I was thinking, oh Lord, this is going to be boring and dry. But it was so engaging. So I think what's fantastic is that you've written it in a very engaging way. So I think that for anybody who has any interest in just being a more educated person around racism right now, I really truly feel like this absolutely is going to do that for them. So if we bring that to the present day, I know that there's so much going on in our country, and we could take this conversation about 55 ways, and we could be on Facebook Live for 3 hours, getting all heated and riled up. But do you have anything that you would say to people now in regards to any of the present day issues? I know that the NFL happens to be a very big thing right now. And I think that, from where I'm kind of watching, we're in a very polarized place where people are either one extreme or they're another. And there's not enough people that are genuinely looking at it from that middle ground and being that devil's advocate to say, wait a minute, this is why this is happening. And it's not a reflection of what people think it is, but it's rather, it's obviously a race related issue. So do you have any thoughts on that? And do you think that, because I think your book, without talking about the NFL, because that's obviously happened before, after your book was done, but I feel like it's completely relevant to, especially how kind of the ending of your book, where you're really just kind of tying it all together. Do you have any, just, I guess, some sage words of advice, or, how people can maybe not be in either of those extremes and really try to find that middle ground, if that's even possible at this point?
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I didn't mean it to be this way, but after the book was completed, the Colin Kaepernick, that's sort of his resistance started, last year. But it has really bubbled over the last, I would say couple of weeks. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you've seen is a heightened level of awareness. This is what I realized is that, from the NFL to a lot of, Black folks in America that have been able to move to a point where they are no longer in dire situations where they're battling just surviving anymore, where they're in a good place, either financially, emotionally, family-wise. They kind of pick different causes that they're going to go after. Right. And I really, truly believe in my heart that everyone has a cause. It may not be a very loud cause, you may not be Oprah and starting schools in Africa, so you're going to scale it based on what your capacity is. But sometimes the diffusion of those causes doesn't centralize our power. Right. And so we don't seem united as a community because we're not all rallying around the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the turn of events that I saw is that when, the president attacked not just Colin Kaepernick, but the NFL, powers that be and the players, and did it in such a disrespectful way, that actually pivoted a lot of people that had engaged in different causes to say, I'm going to push a pin on that one. And I'm not letting it go. That's still going to be my cause in the future, whether it's domestic violence or community violence or, whatever it is that you're really passionate about. And I'm going to get on national television, or I'm going to kneel, or I'm going to be outspoken about this one thing, because he came for people. He came for people, and people said, hold on 1 minute. Just because you don't see that I've been full force kneeling at every single game doesn't mean that I'm not an advocate for my people and my community. I just chose to do it in a different way. But now that you've positioned this, we will rally together and we will come together to fight this together. And what I think was really neat about this is that in part 3 of my book, I talk about, what are some of the things that can help you overcome your urban trauma. It's not something that you ever get rid of. It's something that you master, and something that you get very good at understanding it and managing it over time. But one of the things that I talk about is mental toughness. And mental toughness comes out of the sports world. That's where it came out of.
Yeah.
Because if you're an athlete and if you do not have mental toughness, you can never be the best at your craft, right? You have to beat the physical pain, the emotional, the mental, grueling aspects of being the best athlete in your field, right? And so it's really amazing how that parallel came together, that I didn't mean to really highlight mental toughness because it was in any way connected to what was going to spur out of the NFL, issues that are going on right now, or the resistance, the quiet, disobedience of having to stand up and salute a flag or an anthem that doesn't really not only doesn't represent us, but that the bigger picture is combating police brutality, which is the main topic that is missed in the argument, in the polarizing arguments. People want to make this about the flag and the anthem, and there's a discussion and a time and a place for that. But the real reason has to do with police brutality and the killing of Black men and women unjustified. I mean, that's the real point, right? And so I think that the parallel that the book makes to connecting athletes to the mental toughness that it takes to be the best athlete that they can be is the same exact essential ingredients and components that it takes to overcome urban trauma. So that in essence is the parallel, and that in essence illustrates why this is such an emotional topic for people, why people get so enraged when they're talking about it, why people have a really hard time being tolerant anymore of ignorant comments, of insensitive comments, of the consistent rejection and non-validation of what Black people in this country have had to go to. They're sick of it. And something that I told you before I started the interview, at this point, we are done with fighting for equality. We are demanding equity at all cost.
I feel like I can't even follow up with that. That was so just so well said. Like, I feel like I'm really hoping that those who are watching, I keep looking down because I'm just making sure that we're still live and I haven't screwed up technology again. But this has been a really kind of fascinating conversation. And I feel like I know so much about your topic just from having worked with you for the last 10 months. And of course, being so intimately involved with the book. But so for people who want to either know more about you, want to know maybe, since we're both located in Connecticut, maybe people are from Connecticut and they're watching and they might want to engage with the services of your practice, or they want to buy the book. Can you just kind of lay out all the different ways in which people can find you?
Absolutely. So for the book, I'm going to microaggressions.com, and you'll see there all the resources related to the book, anything that you might need, any further developments in terms of curriculum. You mentioned a little bit before that we strategically decided to take out the piece that covers allies, but there will be some curriculum coming out very soon on how to support allies, true allies that want to fight this, that want to understand this, that want to stand hand in hand, locked arms because they're also sick of the discrimination and the racism and how it impacts, communities of color. So that will be coming out very soon. There's some fact sheets there about the characteristics. And so we'll be very engaged in that website in terms of what comes next after the book. And then for the practice, if you live in Connecticut, you want to know more about what we do, we're integratedwellnessgroup.com and .org. And there it tells you all the services that we offer, and all the programs that are coming out of Integrated Wellness Group. So those you can always also follow me on Facebook at Dr. Maysa Akbar. You can follow me on Urban Trauma, those, and on LinkedIn under Dr. Maysa Akbar as well. So there's a lot of other platforms that you can get communication about the book and upcoming events. I have several upcoming events, including the book, a book launch, a local book launch here in New Haven, and a book signing. So if you purchased your book today, which I really, really hope you do, let's make this a bestseller, my community. We have to make this a bestseller. We have to support each other. And you can bring in your book. We'll do a phenomenal book signing. That book signing is going to be sponsored by the Prosperity Fund, who is backing my book here locally. I'm so appreciative for them. The dates will be coming out very, very soon when that launch and signing will happen. And it's a free event to the public. You can just come, you can show up, you can buy your book there if you don't have one, or you can bring your book and I'll sign. And I'll do a reading that day as well. I'll pick a specific piece that I want to share. So those are all places that you can follow my work. And, of course, if you ever want to engage me in a speaking, opportunity or, any kind of workshop, you can also go to any of those websites to find me.
Yeah. And so if someone goes to Amazon, they would type in Urban Trauma and that will bring up your book. And so it's in print. So it's a paperback version for $24.95. The Kindle version is $9.95. If you're looking for one or the other, just, type it into Amazon's browser and, you should be able to find it relatively easy. Yeah. Good. So thank you so much. I'm so happy that we had time as we're on we're on launch day, which is, a ball of nerves in its own right, but we are over the hump. Like, it is done. It is in the universe. And it's now time for, the purpose-driven publishing community and your community to kind of rally together, buy the book, and really just, create change and make a big impact, because that's at the end of the day what we're both trying to do. So thank you for joining me today. And I'm sure people will hear from both of us very soon.
Yes. Thank you, Jen. You've been amazing, amazing publisher. So anyone who has an idea about a book, please see Jen.
Thank you. And I did not pay her for that, just as an FYI, but I appreciate that.
Right. Thank you, everyone. And like I said, please, if you are having any trouble with the purchase, text me, call me, email me, send a pigeon. We will figure it out. So you can get your book today. Biggest sales happen between 11 and 1, but don't stop there. If you can't buy between 11 and 1, you have the whole day to buy the book and so forth. So, but please try to push sales between 11 and 1. We're almost at 12 o'clock. So Jen, do we know how many sales we're at?
Oh, I can look live. How much fun. It's almost like an auction. Let's see.
I know.
Let's see. It looks like we have about 10 sales since we started going live. We want more than that for sure.
Definitely want more. So people, let's get motivated. Let's just go in there and purchase the book.
Yep. And we got a couple more ebook sales too. So people are paying attention. It's going to take some time to get some traction, but yeah, I think we're off to a good start. And I'm really thrilled that we decided to do this, because I've been so much waiting to kind of the unveiling, to be like, and here is this incredible author who's doing really incredible work. And, after, again, countless strands of hair are missing from both of our heads, but, we're on the happy side of things at this point.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks,
You're welcome. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.